I often have students contact me because they are struggling with getting a good grade on a test. And I will often offer individualized help to those students. But one thing that I have discovered is that when students aren't doing well on a test, it's often because they do not have good study skills. So I decided I was going to record this video for all of my students to try to offer you some good study tips as you're going along so that when it comes time for a test, you will be prepared for it. I have 6 particular tips I want to share with you. And if you're trying to look ahead and see what's written on the board behind me, those tips will be helpful, but I think they will be more helpful as I go through and explain them. So don't shortchange yourself just by kind of looking at the board and deciding you know everything I'm going to say already. I just want to encourage you to hang in there and listen to me explain some of these things in a little bit more depth. Because if you have good study skills, it's not only going to help you in my class, but it's going to help you in any other class that you take as well. So the very first study tip that I have for you is to truly understand your vocabulary words. So many classes have a specific area of vocabulary that you need to be able to comprehend in order to understand the material. And since I teach science, this is particularly true in science. Biology in particular has an incredible amount of vocabulary words. And if you don't understand the vocabulary words, you're not going to understand the material. So when you're studying vocabulary words, you want to do more than just be able to recognize the definition. I know that I have given my students study tips on how to memorize vocabulary words, on how to make flashcards and match the term with the definition. And while that is helpful, you do need to go a step beyond that and make sure that you truly understand each word. You can't just memorize the definition, because if you don't know what the definition means, it doesn't really help you. Can you put that definition into your own words? Can you use the word in an original sentence? Practice doing those things and make sure you truly understand what each vocabulary word means, because by doing that, then you give yourself the basis that you need to understand the rest of the material. Okay, so truly understand what each vocabulary word means. Second tip, make sure that you've corrected your homework. Now, in all of my lesson plans, I tell my students, do your homework, now check your answers. And whether that means you're checking your own answers or whether your parent or classroom teacher is checking them for you and then going over them with you, whichever the answer is to that, whether you're checking it or someone else is checking and handing it back to you and making you fix it yourself, there's a lot more to correcting your homework than just crossing out an incorrect answer and writing down the correct one. You need to understand where that answer came from. If it is a question that you've answered about a topic in the book and you got the wrong answer, you need to go back to the section and say, okay, where did the author talk about this particular topic? Do I need to reread this? Do I need to understand the reasoning behind where this answer came from? If it's the answer to a problem that you've worked, a mathematical type of problem that you've worked, then just crossing out the wrong answer and writing down the correct one isn't going to help you all that much later on. You need to truly understand how to work that problem. Look at the solution that's given to you and say, okay, where did I make my mistake? Oh, I forgot to convert kilograms to grams. That's why it was wrong. Or, oh, I completely used the wrong equation on that. I need to go back and use the correct equation. That equation was for this particular kind of problem. This equation is for this particular kind of problem. So you've got to work through in your mind, why did I miss that homework question? And what do I need to do to get it right if I see a similar one in the future? So it's not just a matter of writing the right answer down and then going off and forgetting about it. It's a matter of correcting it and truly understanding what your mistake was. Okay, so that's the second tip. Third tip, you need to practice taking the test. And you're probably looking at me going, how am I supposed to do that? You only give me one test. How am I supposed to practice doing that? Here's what I mean by that. A lot of students seem to have the misconception that they can study for a test by reading over their notes, by reading over their homework problems. And they think that that's going to prepare them to take a test over the material. Let me ask you a question. If you're going to take a driving test to get your driver's license, and you're expected to drive a car and show that you can correctly operate the car, you can hit the brake when necessary, you can parallel park and get the car into the different situations that you need to get it into without causing a wreck. How are you going to prepare for that driving test? Are you going to read a book? No, of course not. You're going to actually get into a car and you're going to practice driving with an experienced driver who knows what they're doing and can help you when you make mistakes. In the same way, when you take a science test or any other kind of test for that matter, the teacher is not asking you if you can read the material. The teacher is asking you if you can answer questions about the material. Can you work problems about this particular material? So reading your notes, reading the textbook, that's not going to help you prepare for a test. What you need to do instead is to practice answering questions and to practice working problems. If those kinds of things if you're going to have problems on the test, you need to practice working the problems. If you're taking a math test, reading how somebody else did the problem doesn't help. You need to make sure you can work the problem yourself, because that's what the teacher's going to ask you to do. How do I do that? Well, you can start by going over your homework. You should have all the correct answers because of step number 2. You've already corrected all your homework when you've done it, so you should have all the correct answers. So go back, cover up the answer, read the question and say, okay, do I know the answer to that? And here's another thing where students are going to tend to get themselves in trouble. Oh yeah, I know the answer to that, but then they don't actually answer the question. They think it's in their head someplace, but they don't force themselves to either write the answer down or maybe say the answer out loud and get a really firm answer to the question. No mushy answers are allowed. If you're going to give a mushy answer, then you probably really don't know the answer to the question. So you need to be able to give a complete, concise answer to the homework questions that you've been asked so that you will know the material when it comes time to answer a similar question on the test. Same way with the homework problem. If on your test, you are not allowed to use any note cards or you're not going to be given any formulas, then you better have the formulas memorized when you're studying for the test. If you need to be able to calculate acceleration, for example, then you need to know that acceleration is the change in velocity over the change in time. And so you need to know that. And so when you read the problem, you need to be able to recognize, okay, this is the equation I need. This is how I'm going to plug the values in. This is how I'm going to get the answer to that. Okay. Then you have the correct answer. So once you've worked through it, you need to check yourself. Do you need to go back and work every single problem in the homework? Probably not, because usually when you've done homework, you've done several different examples of the same type of problem. So if you know how to do every single type of problem, if you've done 6 acceleration problems in your homework, pick the most difficult one, make sure you know how to work that one again, and then go on to the next topic. But you actually have to not just read over the material, but actually practice answering questions, practice working the problems to make sure, because that's what you're going to actually have to do on the test. Okay, so that's step number 3. Step number 4 is, as you're studying, you want to mix up the order of the questions as you go. If you haven't noticed this before, usually when teachers write tests, the questions are not in exactly the same order that they were in the chapter. The topics are not in the same order that they were in the chapter. In fact, sometimes even some of those topics are kind of mixed together, and you have to be able to draw a little bit from here and a little bit from here in order to answer those questions. So when you are studying, you want to make sure that you're mixing up the order of the questions that you're studying as well. You won't be able to rely on the sequence of the questions to trigger your memory as to what the answers are. You have to know the topics individually. So as you're studying, make sure that you're mixing up the order of the topics. So again, so that you'll be prepared for the fact that they'll be mixed up on the test also. Okay. The next thing you can do is you can make up your own questions. Pretend that you're going to write your own test. If you have a topic, let's say that you're studying the electron configuration of some different types of elements, you can say, well, I didn't do any homework questions on finding the electron configuration of magnesium, but I know how to do that one. So how would I do the electron configuration of magnesium? And so you practice doing that one. You make up your own questions, because by doing that, you're showing that you know what kinds of questions that the teacher could ask you, and you're showing that you then know how to answer those questions. Okay, so practice making up your own questions. Again, that shows that you've thought through the material and you understand what you might be asked. It's a good thing to anticipate those kinds of questions. Okay. Lastly, you need to make sure that you're studying as you go along. And you've probably heard this before, but if you wait until the night before the test before you start studying, that's really not an effective way to study. Especially in classes like math and science, what you've learned in the chapter tends to build on itself. So if, for example, if you are learning how to do velocity problems first, and then you learn how to do acceleration problems after that, you have to understand the concept of velocity before you can understand the concept of acceleration. And so if you don't understand the one, you're not going to understand the next piece either. It kind of reminds me of that verse in Matthew 6 that talks about, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Instead, today has enough trouble of its own. I realize that I'm not taking that verse and, doing a really good topical study on it or anything like that. But what it does, the reason I think of that verse is because whatever I'm given to understand for today, I need to thoroughly understand today's material before I go on and try to understand tomorrow's material. Because if I only kind of understand today and then I get something new tomorrow, it's going to be that much harder. And so sometimes what happens is if you don't study as you go along, by the time you get to the end of the chapter, you have such a tangled mess of topics in your brain that you then can't untangle everything before you have to take the test the next day. And of course, the chapter 2 is going to build on chapter 1. Chapter 3 is going to build on chapter 2. So you want to make sure that you're studying as you go along. I mean, every day before you start the next topic, go back and look at the day before. Did I really understand that? Is there something I didn't quite get? Is there something I can review? Can I go back and review vocabulary words to make sure I've got the ones that I had before I add some new ones onto that? So you want to make sure that you're keeping up every single day with your studying. Go back and do a little bit of review every single day on something before you start the next topic. And that's also going to make your test prep go much easier. A lot of times you're not going to have to study a whole lot for the test if you have been studying all the way through. Okay, so 6 study tips to hopefully make your test prep a little easier. And you're probably sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, that sounds like an awful lot of work. It sounds like it'd be way easier just to learn it the night before the test. Well, learning to truly learn something is hard work. And if you can develop good study habits now, that's going to benefit you for any class that you take in the future. So I really want you to be able to develop those good study habits, because that's the way you're going to understand the material. That's the way you're really going to do well and to glorify our Father in heaven by the types of things that we're doing in our classwork as we go along. Okay, so hopefully that information helps you and you are able to have an amazingly fantastic year because you are studying efficiently and well and really mastering the material in your classes.